Okay, we are going to continue now with a powerful insight into how tokenization is reshaping real estate. We're going to be hearing from Lakshmi, from Kim Diamond, who we just saw, and William Chipwater. Let me just give you some of their backgrounds. Kim has over 30 years of experience in the commercial real estate, capital, structured finance, and debt capital markets. Besides her leadership role at Great X, she's also been actively involved with various significant ventures. And Chip Rogers is the CEO of Americans for Fair Treatment. Prior to this, he led the American Hotel and Lodging Association, where he earned national recognition for his advocacy and leadership, including honours from the Hill, Washingtonian, and Business Travel News. A former Senate Majority Leader in Georgia, Chip brings decades of public policy and industry experience to the stage. So please welcome Lakshmi, Kim, and Chip to the stage.
All right, let's get started. So thank you, gentlemen, for being here and joining me. The last time we were together to talk about this real-world asset tokenization was about 6 months ago, maybe a little bit less. And given how fast this world moves, there's been a lot that's happened since then. The commonality among the three of us is that we all come from traditional finance, specifically commercial real estate. So we're here to sort of bridge the two worlds of TradFi and DeFi for the audience today. And Chip, I think it makes sense, given your background in Washington, the work you've done with multiple presidential administrations, and your lobbying efforts in Washington, D.C. It's been a very big week in D.C. In fact, it's been a very big 24 hours. So maybe you can tell the audience what's transpired, what's happened, and what the implications are for real-world asset tokenization and the digital asset ecosystem in general.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Thanks for having me, Lakshmi. So I think as we talk about this subject in general, I think what underpins all of it is what is the stability of this? What are the regulations that will allow us to have? Because without the stability, without the regulations, it's not going to move at the speed we want it to. So just yesterday, in fact, last night, the U.S. Senate passed what's known as the Genius Act. I don't know how genius it was, but it passed. And it had 62 votes, which is important because in the U.S. Senate, as many of you in this room know, you have to have at least 60 votes to pass anything, unless it's a reconciliation bill. We're not going to get into that. That would take us all day to try to explain that. That's what the big, beautiful bill is, what I'm talking about. The Genius Act passed with 68 votes. That's really important. It now goes to the House, and they'll start looking at it. What does it do? It really only does one thing. It's very simple and should be completely non-controversial. And that is, it sets up the guidelines, the rules behind stablecoin. It essentially says stablecoin will be backed up by the U.S. dollar. And that certainly helps the U.S. Investments into this industry. It certainly helps stablecoin. It says it's going to be backed up with the U.S. dollar, and there's all sorts of other rules. Then that goes to the House. The House has already passed legislation that is like that. In fact, does more than that last year. But as you know, every 2 years, these things die when you get a new Congress. So they have to have additional legislation on top of it. So this is where it gets a little intricate. So when you start thinking about things that sound like they're a no-brainer, like this should happen quite easily, that's not how government works, as everybody knows. And so the House, the chairman of the House committee that is considering this, has his own bill that goes well beyond what the Genius Act does. It's called the Clarity Act. The Clarity Act, by a gentleman by the name of Frenchville, he's the chairman of the Financial Services Committee of the House, seeks to regulate all digital assets. And while that's an important thing, a positive thing, and really not that controversial, anytime you start mixing regulating stablecoin with regulating all digital assets, it begins to get a little murky. And so the question is, if now this bill has passed the Senate, will the House just simply pass it to the Senate directly to the president? Will the House make minor changes, which would require what's known as the conference committee for both sides to agree and then send it to the president? Or will the House take the bold step of actually adding the Clarity Act to the Genius Act and have one big beautiful bill that deals with digital assets and stablecoin, and take all that and send it to the president? The good news is, if you support all this, which most people do, the president is also in support of it. So ultimately, the president will get something on his desk. He tends not to lose too much, especially when he controls the House and Senate. So he'll get something. The question is, will it only be stablecoin, or will it be stablecoin plus digital assets? That's going to play out over the next 3 months.
So Lakshmi, turning to you, you are running a traditional family office, the core business of which is hospitality. You own and manage hotels. What are you doing in the digital asset space? I mean, aside from being a genius and being an early investor in Bitcoin, we still don't know how much, but that's okay. We'll get it out of you eventually, maybe. What are you doing in the digital asset space, and what problem are you solving?
Thank you, Chip, for being with us today. It's great to have a policy side conversation. In the last 7 years, the hottest topic has been the regulatory challenge in the digital asset space. I call the crypto industry, the digital asset industry, I use a word called FIRE. For me, the FIRE is an acronym. The FIRE stands for Financial Independency, Retirement Early. And that's the reason why this crypto industry or a digital asset industry has been on wild growth across the world. By facts, you know, if you put that one, I already quoted this one. There are more than 600 million crypto users in the last 4 years. That's the growth of the market from the post-COVID. There's a completely different spectrum as came into the space now. In the first 120 days of the current government in US, they have passed more than 21 different legislation supporting digital asset world. So that's a fastest and most passed legislation in the history of United States. And if you look at the last 50 years, maybe most of our people sitting in our lifetime, US government never ever announced a strategic reserve. This is the first time United States government announced a strategic reserve, that too on a financial instrument, which is on Bitcoin. So this is completely, previously they issued strategic reserves on like petroleum, strategic oil reserve. They announced helium or some of the rare minerals and materials, never on an asset class. So given all this background, so you can't say whether you are a family office or any type of an asset allocators that you will be out of the space. You can plan whatever you want, but still you have to be in the space. You can have a 1% allocation or a 30% allocation, but there is a need to have an allocation in the space. So we as a traditional family office, we come from a last 50 years running in completely traditional family business. So given that background, we have taken the space very, very serious. So what currently we are looking two aspects. One aspect is what's happening in the same existing crypto digital asset space. We are one of the, we take bold steps, and we are leading investors in the top 20 crypto coins or tokens in the industry. That's one side. Second aspect is we are closely looking in tokenizing real world assets. And we strongly believe everything will be tokenized. Everything, whatever you see, whether the bonds, insurance policies, bank deposits, real estate, everything will be tokenized. So if I have to explain this in a very simple aspect, every stocks will be tokenized. And every stock exchanges that's coming up, either existing old or the new, or closely looking at the space. So everything, that's in a bottom line. It may be a very blunt or a generalization statement, but that's a fact. That's a fact. Every asset class which has a global interest will be tokenized.
Can I add to that? And it's where we started earlier. That is absolutely going to happen, and it's going to happen at a faster rate if the regulations are in place that allows it to happen, that creates the stability and the confidence of investors to look at this and say, yes, this needs to take place. I think for the U.S. politically right now, they're in a good space because they have to walk a very fine line between regulation and too much regulation. If you do too much regulation, the market will move elsewhere. And so the U.S. is saying, how can we regulate this as the world's largest economy, but not over-regulate it? And I think politically right now, with the Republicans where they are and President Trump, that is a good space. President Biden was not so much in favor of this. In fact, he slow-tracked much of this. And if you look at some of President Biden's allies that were against the actions that were taken in the U.S. Senate recently, they don't seem to be much in favor of this. And so I think politically right now this lines up to create this. But to your point, it has to happen rather quickly. The midterm elections are coming up. So if it doesn't happen probably in the next 12 months, it's going to be in danger.
So assuming that we do get the regulatory backdrop and the support from Washington, what are you thinking of doing relative to tokenizing real-world assets, Lakshmi?
The closest assets or the easiest asset class is two things commonly we look at it. One is the stock market, second is the real estate. Real estate is the most aspiring asset class by everyone. Everyone in an individual level would like to have a portfolio of real estate with them, whether it's a multifamily, it's an apartments, or a single family standalone homes, or they would like to have a commercial real estate, whether a shop or an hotel or an industrial building. Everybody would like to have them in their portfolio. And also real estate is also called a generational asset class. People own it for multiple generations. So that's, given our background, our closest to our heart is we would like to tokenize real estate. That's where we are focusing on at this juncture.
So tell me a little bit, I know you've got a specific plan and you're starting with hotels. Why hotels? And Chip, maybe you can add on by saying, do you think that the hotel industry is going to be embracing, fractional ownership? And how do you think the flag and the brands will react to this type of thing?
Oh, I'll go first. Okay. I think the brands would welcome it. And what has changed, and this started pre-COVID, but what has changed in the hotel industry on the brand side is that, and this was really spurred on by short-term rentals, mainly Airbnb, is that the world is traveling more than it has ever traveled before. That is absolutely not going to stop. That trend is gone. That's happening. So why do people travel? Well, they travel because they want an individual experience. And in a world where technology can afford you that, you had the rise of short-term rentals where people could choose the type of setting that they wanted in the exact place that they wanted. And that pushed the brands to say, we just can't keep creating the next Marriott hotel or the next Hilton hotel or the next Holiday Inn Express. There's certainly a market for that. So what you have seen happen in the marketplace are the brands. I was just walking through an historic hotel here in London yesterday. And if you're just an average consumer and you walk up and you see the hotel, it's been there 100 years, very historic hotel, you don't recognize that it's actually a Marriott product. It's in the autograph collection. And so there might be a little sign that says that, but consumers want that. And so the brands want to have this happen because they're in this competition with the short-term rental industry that has created this idea of ownership. And if you think about short-term rental industry, it basically is fractional ownership, right? And so the brands certainly want to have this happen as well. And to your point earlier, Lakshmi, about right, how easy is it to buy a stock? I can pull out my phone right now and buy stock in 2 seconds. How easy is it to buy a hotel? It takes a long time, a lot of money, a lot of wasted resources on attorneys and brokers and everything else. You take all that out of the mix, and all of a sudden, purchasing and becoming part of the owner class in the fastest growing part of the economy worldwide, which is travel, it's something that is absolutely going to take off.
So Lakshmi, okay, the obvious benefit of tokenization is democratization of ownership, which is essentially what you just were speaking to. But what would incent or what would motivate property owners to be willing to do this? What problem are you solving for them?
See, the purpose of tokenization is basically accessing liquidity, global liquidity for a local asset pool. It need not to be a hotel, any type of an asset class. There's an aspiration for people to own an UK, any type of properties. Any stable economy, whether UK properties, US properties, one of the hottest properties nowadays in the world is the Dubai properties. Whether they're looking the properties for an yield, they're looking a property for appreciation, or they're looking for a property for another type of an income, which is a dollar-backed income or a pound-backed income, a stable economy-backed income. So from the investor perspective, a global investors accessing a global asset class. From an asset class perspective, accessing the global investor, one of the biggest challenge today, you may have one of the greatest property, but you are still dependent on the local investor who come in search of you. You have to wait for them to come and pick up the property. How do you take your local property if it's a real estate? It's applied to stocks. There are 40 million shareholders in Apple. If I'm right, Apple is a $3 trillion company, which has 40 million shareholder. 67% of the shareholders of Apple remains in US. 33% of the shareholders, it's outside US, but they are institutions or high net worth individuals. But Apple has got 900 million consumers. But the shareholders is only 46 million shareholders. What happens if all the 900 million user of Apple can become a shareholder of Apple? Oh, this applies to everything. Whether a Google, whether it is a Microsoft, whether it is even an organization like an Emirates. Emirates, and it is a privately held company. It's valued for only a $50 billion, if I'm not mistaken. So overnight, if Emirates decide to make every Emirates loyal consumers, whoever has got an Emirates Skywards point holders, become a shareholders. Emirates carries more than 1.5 million different passengers every year. So if all this Emirates Skyward member becoming a shareholder overnight. So this is what happened. It's a global, it's more than democratization. So democratization breaks and allow everybody to participate. But globalization with the democratization, it's a boundaryless. Most of the best possible financial instrument in the US are not accessible beyond US for the global audience. And same thing for UK. The best possible, the instruments of UK are geographically available only UK or a European Union users, or you have to be an institution to get an accessibility. What if somebody sitting in Vietnam, Thailand, Sri Lanka, or somewhere in Mexico, Cuba can access that financial instrument, generate income in that, one of the stable currencies. And that's what tokenization is going to do for the various asset classes. And specifically when the asset classes are physical or it can be validated, so there are two things happening in the industry. One thing, that the crypto industry, which doesn't have anything backup, right? The meme coins, NFTs, all those spaces. But they are building the infrastructure for the stable coin and stable tokens and the real world assets. So those, the real world assets are going to change. And that's where we as an organization is focusing on.
It's fascinating, it really is. It's like when I attend the digital asset conferences, it feels like we're way, way behind. But when I live back in the traditional finance world, it feels like we're way, way, way ahead. Do you feel the time is right?
The time is always right, yes. But I do want to go back to what we were talking about earlier in the hotel industry.
Sure.
If you think about just Airbnb, I mean, Airbnb today is worth more than Marriott, Hilton, Hyatt, and IHG combined. Now, those four iconic global names in the hotel industry own almost no assets. If you think about Marriott, it franchises 99% of its hotels, right? And so they're a global brand, and in fact, they make tons of their money off their point system. They would love the Bonvoy point to actually become a currency. But they're a global brand with thousands of owners. There are some in this room right now that own Marriott hotels. What happens if tomorrow they go from thousands of owners to millions of owners? Well, that's a lot better for Marriott as a brand, and it's a lot better for the consumer because now I'm an owner consumer. And so this changes that dynamic considerably. And so to your point earlier, do they want this? Absolutely, they'd love to have it.
It's amazing.
See, to add points from what Chip was saying, there are commonly, when you take any business, there are three challenges. One of them is regulatory, which they have been debating. So we have moved on the regulatory aspect. Second is an adoption. So when the Airbnb was invented, people thought, hey, why will I go and stay in somebody's home? Or will somebody be able to open up their homes for someone to stay? Same thing with Uber. What happens if I'm going in, I don't know, I'm calling a guy and the taxi comes in, he's not a regular driver, how can I get into the car? What will happen to me? Or will somebody who is owning a car will take me? So there are a lot of, even people thought in the initial days, nobody will buy footwear from an online. People, because if you, those people sitting in the room who are 45 or 50 years old, so 25 years back, if I came and tell you people will buy the shoes and footwears and things from an online, you will say, you are gone crazy. Because 25, 30 years back, the practice is you go to a shoe shop, you wear it, you test it, walk here and there, watch in a mirror, everything is comfortable, then only you pick it up. That's a consumer adoption. Today, if you look at it, everything, all the brands, adoptions of footwear is one of the largest sold. Amazon started with then book selling because even Amazon thought people will not buy clothes and the shoes. And clothes and shoes are bought on everything by an online, the fashion industry, e-commerce industry. And the same conversions happened from the Airbnb as well as the Uber taxi. All these things, adoption, consumer never know till they have been introduced to something. Once consumer got introduced, they will get adopted. It's an adoption is an ongoing process. But when the industry drives it together, when the whole industry drives it together, adoption becomes faster. And that's what's happening with the Bitcoin, Ethereum, Solana. You take any of the crypto industry, it's a network effect. It's a platform game. And that's what the penetration is happening. And this is coming to the real world asset world.
I'll give you two, that's a great point, two real world examples. And I'm going to go back to the hotel industry because everybody understands it. It used to be 20 years ago, if you wanted to build a hotel, you had to figure out how much space do I need to build this hotel? And that space included the building and the parking spots. Today, you don't have to have hardly any parking spots. Why? Because your guests are arriving in Uber. They're not driving and parking, right? The second thing you would probably have to consider if you're building a hotel 25 years ago is, okay, how am I going to feed my guests? I've got to build a restaurant. And let me just tell you, and I know there's a few hoteliers in here, hoteliers hate running restaurants. Like that's the worst part of it. They want to run a hotel, not a restaurant. But you have to consider that, like, how am I going to feed my guests? Today, you see hotels, the nicer ones have the nice restaurants, but so many hotels are saying, we're not doing any of this feeding people anymore. It's either grab and go, or the guest has figured out, I'm going to use Uber Eats or whatever app that I have to have food delivered to me from the restaurant that I want in the local area. So all of this is changing, to your point, because once it's been introduced, consumers say, I don't need to rent a car to drive to the hotel, and I don't need to eat inside the hotel at the hotel-created restaurant. These things I can choose on my own.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that it's changing when you see organizations like Franklin Templeton jump in with their Benji coin and BlackRock with BIDL. So that's part of the introduction, right? But the question is, it'll be very exciting when we finally do see real-world asset tokenization, because that, to me, feels like the next logical step.
It's coming. Every institutions have already started adopting, right? BlackRock has got a BIDL token. Franklin Templeton has got a Benji token. Like this, Standard Chartered Bank, ICBC Bank, HSBC Bank, JP Morgan already got a JP coin or a Chase coin, something they already have a coin. All the banks and financial institutions across the US are getting into the game, and it's coming. Public blockchains are good, but they have their own challenges at this juncture. Even though we say there's a decentralization, there's a centralization in decentralization as of now. It's not fully decentralized, other than Bitcoin, Ethereum, the rest, everything has got a centralization hook onto that somewhere, right? So what will happen is when the institutions are walking in, still safety is a concern, still they come under a regulator, so they will be still in a private blockchain. So what can happen is this. If the US government, so the SEC officially announced, me and Chip has a pleasure of attending the task force, SEC task force on the crypto industry. They set up something called a sandbox for innovation in SEC now. Officially, they're inviting people to come and innovate under the SEC umbrella. So based on that, what is going to happen now is government will open up saying all the stable coin, stable token has to be issued on this blockchain. They can recognize, they put a stamp on it. If the government does that one, then that rails can be used for the public blockchain ledger system.
I mean, you know, anytime you're trying to foster adoption, it's introduction, as Lakshmi said, but really the cornerstone at the end of the day is trust, right? And so what the government is trying to do now with these rules, with these regulations, assuming they don't go overboard, is to take the introduction to the next logical step, which is to, you know, foster and establish the trust.
And keep in mind that when government attempts to regulate something, typically they get it wrong, right? And it changes over time until they get it right. So use Uber as an example. Do you remember when Uber first came out? And I don't know if everyone's even seen the movie about Uber, but it really documents this well. It was just the wild, wild west. I mean, people get hailing cars all over the place. There were no rules. And then the first thing government did is they overregulated. They said, well, you can get Uber, but we don't want you to compete with the taxis, so you actually can't take Uber, you can't get Uber pickups at the airport. Remember that happening? It was like 15 years ago. Like most, at least US airports, you couldn't call an Uber. Today, of course, all that nonsense is gone because the consumer said, no, we're not gonna play that game. And so the government said, oh, we need to regulate. They overregulated, and then they pulled back to a place where the market actually works. I hope that's not the case here, because that could do some serious damage, but that is the typical pathway for government regulation.
I think we need to cut it off before they give us the hook, but thank you guys so much.
Thank you.